So, hi, Cathy Goodwin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Looking forward to interviewing you. I know you've been a subscriber to my newsletter for years and know what I'm up to, but I've never
Yeah.
met you before that I can remember,
I
unless you
don't think
attended a
so.
workshop or
No,
something. No.
absolutely not. No, don't know you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming and to the interview. So, tell me, how are you an ordinary visionary?
Great question. I am revising the way small businesses think about branding and think about marketing themselves. I was a marketing professor for many years, and I would teach the traditional branding application, that like Budweiser, be like Nike, be like Coca-Cola. But when you're a one-person business, you cannot do that. You have to be specifically you have to be specifically about you because people are not interested in learning how to yeah, so I realized there had to be something different because a lot of my clients were in small businesses and they were the only person. Maybe they brought in a partner, maybe they hired a designer, they hired people remotely. Maybe they brought in their spouses. And I got that a lot. Like, well, my wife thinks, no, 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 we don't want to hear that. And so I came up with a concept that involves five what I call story archetypes that people can use for their branding. And I have found they apply to every business brand that I looked at. If they fit my category, they were small and they were service oriented. They do not apply to Coca-Cola. I mean, when a person
Right.
said, well, how would you apply this framework to Pepsi? I have no idea. Pepsi has its own branding staff. They don't need me. And I don't know how it would apply to a mid-sized company. But I'm working with tiny entrepreneurial, like you are, a lot of your clients,
Yeah.
and they cannot use Budweiser. They try. They try to use Budweiser. Their coaches
Well,
tell them, and they're wrong.
yeah, we try to create some image that just doesn't fit. So tell me, what are your archetypes? What are the
Okay.
steps that you go through to help someone come up with a brand that really works for them?
Oh, well, I have a whole quiz people can, if they want to study the archetype quiz, but I'll briefly go through that. The first is the role model, and many, many coaches are role models. The role model makes a promise. I did it and you can too. I'm just like you. If I did it, you can. And they tell stories about how they're like their clients. They tell stories about how they did the very same things they want their clients to do. They tell stories about being human. And that is what the role model does. And I know if you know Connie Reagan Green is a really great example of a role model. I could name other names, but that's a very or Cindy Bedar. I don't know if you know that name. Also, I interviewed her on my podcast. Ellen Finkelstein, role model. So all these people are role models. Then the next one is the innovator. And I'm pretty sure you know Christina Hills, who is a quintessential innovator. The innovator says, and makes this promise: I invented something, and you can only get it from me. And it is really impactful. It will have an enormous impact on the way you do business. For instance, there's one where Christina has the website creation workshop where she actually has a platform. She has unique custom made software to deliver her service. And they tell stories about how their clients succeeded really, really well by using their innovation. Their innovators do not talk about themselves very much, except to illustrate the concepts that they want to put across.
So
The
we've got a unique process, a unique system, a unique whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So when you're talking about these five archetypes, you can't have all five. You have to settle
No,
on one.
yes, and you
I
can
see.
yes, you can change. So like also there's one, the celebrity. Celebrities do not follow me and they don't listen to me. Celebrities have the message of I did something so great that I've earned the right to tell you what to do. and they are really outrageous in many ways. Sometimes they have boats and cars and houses and mansions, but sometimes they are just outrageous. They use four-letter words, they use bad language, they break all the rules, and they have earned the right to do this. And they tell stories the way People magazine reports on people. They are they have fans. They don't have followers. People admire them. They don't necessarily want to be like them, but they want to know about them. And
Right,
some
right.
people morph and become a celebrity. I mean, you have to really earn that role.
Well,
So
that's
yeah,
never been mine for sure.
no,
Mine
no,
is so far mine is the first archetype.
no. I think you're more of an educator type.
Well, there's probably combos. So let's not get confused.
No, yeah,
So the second one was again
innovator.
Innovator.
This
What's the
in the
third one?
educator, and I'm an educator. I think you're an
Okay.
educator. An
Okay.
educator makes the promise, I have a lot of knowledge, and if you apply the knowledge that I am going to teach you, you will be successful. And I think that's what I see you doing. I remember you've had articles, you've had all kinds of
Oh yeah.
information, and
Yeah.
you disseminate information. So it's not about you. We don't know anything. I don't know anything about you. It's about the information you disseminate that
Okay.
pertains to marketing.
Yeah, well, you're right there. Well, I mentioned that in many cases. I'm
Mm.
like you. I'm a self-employed professional like you are.
Yeah,
I've gone through
yeah.
what you've gone
But
through.
you don't tell
But
stories about that. You tell stories
yeah,
about business. You talk about business,
yeah,
and you don't use yourself as an example, as something people should follow. I mean, we don't have to follow you. We don't, it's nice that you are like us. That's how you got this knowledge, but it's
yeah.
tangential to your main message that
Okay.
that you are doing all these things. So those are and the one we didn't mention, which very few people can do, is passionate advocate. They're mostly lawyers, or occasionally there's someone like a wedding planner, and they say, I will go to the ends of the earth for you. I will do whatever it takes. And their stories are about how they help people out of messes. And I recommend people not accept that archetype unless they absolutely have to, because it'll kill your life. I mean, there are people, people will expect all kinds of things. And I had a client who was a passionate advocate, and they are extremely effective. They do not have newsletters. They do not. People find them all kinds of ways, but they're very special. So I don't. I usually work with role models and innovators and educators. Those are the three most common, and I suspect that's who you work with too.
Yeah. So, and then the other one was passionate advocate. What's number five?
Celebrity. The
Celebrity.
Yeah.
You don't get to be that unless you are that.
Yeah, and then they
Yeah.
aren't going to come to. They're not going to come to you. They're not going to come to me. They have their own world. It's like, like Taylor Swift does not come to anybody for that we know for help. They live in their own world and they get admired. And yeah, you have to really earn your way. I know people who have morphed from being role models to being celebrities, and they've done well. But usually, you don't start as a celebrity. And I don't. They don't come to me. I don't know. They don't. I don't do business with them.
So first of all, you decide, well, where am I in those five categories? So
Yeah,
I'm an educator.
yeah.
So that's sort of the foundation of my brand. So where do I go from there?
Well, you decide that you're going to focus on presenting information. You are not going to tell stories about your personal life. I mean, you might have an occasional one here and there, but we don't even know if you're married, if you're single, if you have kids. We don't know where you live, what kind of house you live in, where you go on vacation. We don't care. I mean, what we care about is how you can give us information in courses, in this case, it's in videos and blogs that will make our business better.
Yeah.
And that's it. Those are the kinds of stories. And also, if you're an educator, you probably sign your emails something like "Until next time" or "Until we see each other." How do you sign your emails?
Cheers, Robert.
Okay, that is one. Some educators do use cheers. Innovators almost always use cheer. I don't know why, but I know some educators who do use cheers.
Yeah. So so let's say I'm an educator.
Yep.
So I'm So that pretty much follows what I did. I mean, I started a
Mm-hmm.
newsletter 25 years ago,
Yep.
and then I grew the newsletter really big because it was, the timing
Yeah.
was good. My
Yeah.
search
Yeah.
engine stuff on Google I was lucky at the right
Yeah.
time. It's a lot harder than it
Yeah.
is now. Anyway, so I sent out something every single week,
Yep.
and then I wrote a book that sold a
Yeah.
lot of copies.
Yeah, educators and innovators write, well, especially educators write books.
Yeah,
Yes, that is one thing they do. They
yeah,
and when you build your brand, you start with the educator, and then you ask yourself, how am I different from other educators? How am I different from other people in the field? What stories can I tell? What success stories? And if we were working together, and I was working on your brand or any other marketing challenge, I would ask you for 3 success stories, and that would tell me a lot about how you work, and we would go from there into building a brand. And I also would add that when you are a solopreneur, a lot of times you don't have a brand the way Budweiser does or the way Coca-Cola does. You don't have pretty colors and a logo. A lot of times your brand is invisible because people know who you are by what you say. I mean, that's why someone could steal any of my ebooks and they couldn't sell them because it wouldn't sound like them. I,
right, right.
and they can't steal your ideas. I don't worry about it at all because you are the only one who could deliver those in your voice.
Well, some people have tried to steal my ideas. Some people have copied the homepage to my website and put it up as theirs.
Oh,
People have done that kind of thing.
yeah.
So, so let's say I'm grounded as an educator.
Mhm.
So let's talk a bit about messaging, because branding is who I am, where I'm
Mhm.
coming from, how I'm working with clients, how I'm
Yeah.
perceived as an
Mhm.
educator. But then there's a variety of things you can do to message about your business.
Mhm.
And the message, I'm an educator, isn't very powerful.
No, you don't say that.
So, my message is always some version of, I can help you attract more clients.
Yeah.
And also, I zeroed in on who I worked with. As a self-employed professional,
Mhm.
I can help you attract more clients.
Yeah.
It wasn't sexy, but
Yeah.
people understood it, right?
Yeah. 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 And that adds credibility to what you're teaching them. And
Right,
your stories, the stories you tell as an educator are stories that illustrate concepts you want to communicate.
right,
So there is one educator who has a story about hiring a handyman to build a deck, and he uses that to illustrate the idea of the flow of a business. The whole idea of having some starting small and going big. And he says first that he showed up and said, "Can I help you?" So he hung a few pictures, and then he painted a few walls, and then he did a few more things, and then he ended up building a deck, and he uses that to illustrate that whole concept of what how you I can't think of the word that you use, and that's the kind of story that you hear from educators. We tend to tell stories that are not about us, or even, well, we tell stories about the clients and how they succeeded. Everybody does that. All 5 archetypes do. Well, maybe I have to think about celebrity, but the major ones do. But you you tell stories to illustrate some of your important points, and you say, this is what I want you to learn, and that's the way you message.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've suggested this to millions of clients. Well, I don't know millions, but a lot of people over the years, because a success story is a really low key way to market. I was working with someone who was struggling with X. He
Yeah.
didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And so we sort of looked at this and we talked about this. And one thing I suggested is he try this, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And as a result of that, and then people go, oh, well, that's someone he helped. So
Hmm.
he's not saying buy my services, but
Right.
he's saying, look,
Yeah.
look who I've helped.
Yes, that is very powerful. When I
Yeah,
write a website for someone, the first thing I say is, give me 3 success stories, because that'll tell me how you work. And you could add some detail. You could say, I use my proven, what's a repeatable 3-step system, my proprietary 3-step system. And we applied that to his unique situation. And as a result, today he is doing X, Y, and Z. And that is very powerful. I
Yeah.
think everyone should have, and this is a good takeaway for the audience, have 3 success stories ready.
Yeah.
And when
Put
you
them on
go
your website.
put them on, when you go to your copywriter, bring your stories.
Yeah. Well, and the idea before, during, and after is good. So
Yeah.
it's coherent.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like they were struggling with this.
Yeah.
The mistake they were making was such and
Yeah.
such.
Yeah.
What we helped them with this, and now they're able to do that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And
Well,
so people can see, well, I'm like that. I could get that.
yeah, and if you're copywriting, there are 3 questions you can ask your client about their problem. You can ask, what was the problem? Like I couldn't write this copy. And the second thing you ask is, what was holding you back? Why couldn't you do it yourself? Why do you need help? And the third question, which most people do not ask, is, what have you tried before? That is
Right.
really critical. If someone says, well, I stayed up all night writing my copy, or someone says, I read books on this problem, or it tells you a lot about where they're coming from, or if they've had other coaches who did not help them. You say, okay, why didn't they help you? And that helps you really reframe towards your client. So I encourage everyone to come up with the answers to those 3 questions.
Cathy, do you find yourself going out in the world and seeing a business and going, oh, that's their brand. That's how they're communicating it. They're doing a good job, a medium job, a terrible job. Do you kind of have a filter for that like I do?
If they're small one-person businesses, then the closest thing might be a personal brand. The question, if they're small one-person or very small businesses, I don't think of the brand, because a lot of brands are invisible. Some of the most successful people I know do not really. If you said, what is your brand? I don't know. And I can't tell by looking at them, but I know how they sound. I know what they want to get across. I know, like, I'm thinking of one entrepreneur who's really successful, and I don't think she has a brand. I don't think she even has a website, but I know who she is. And her message is, I did it. Here are all the ways I did it for you. And she has a million articles on how she did things, how she struggled, how she succeeded. And that's her invisible brand. You couldn't, well, she's a role model in my framework, but you couldn't put a real brand on it. I mean, she doesn't have colors, she doesn't have a logo, she doesn't have typeface, but I know her
Yeah.
voice, and what she says is that message. But generally, I don't usually look for brand as much when I'm looking at small. I do look at business when I look at big businesses like Budweiser or Coca-Cola. Yeah, then I'm very conscious of the brand. But that's because here's one of the differences. When you see the brand for Coca-Cola and you see the bottles in the store, there's a separation. The brand of Coca-Cola has to leave you with a mood or a warm and fuzzy feeling that you take with you when you make your purchase. When you're buying from me, you don't have time. I mean, you see my page, you say, oh, okay, this is what she's about. I think I'll hire her. And next thing I know, I've got money in my uh, my shopping cart, and that's it. Or they may come back another day and do it later, but it's still not a separation. So I don't have that time where they can really mull over, who I am and what to expect, or in a surprise place. They buy on the spot.
So let me back up to your other 3 archetypes. So what was the first one again?
Role model.
So the role model. So as I said, I sort of saw myself in that
Mm-hmm.
role to some degree, but you say not so much from my perception. So that's the things I'm learning about my business from the past that I can't change. It's like, okay, but that doesn't mean there won't be some admixture of these things. But so how does a role model market themselves
Well,
effectively?
yeah, the role model almost always has a newsletter, and well, some of the other archetypes do, but the role model is fanatic. The role model has a lot of contact with their clients, but what's really important with a role model is that the stories they tell, they say, I am like you, I could be like you. And the stories are very intimate. They're very personal. They're about their families. There's one role model who has a story every single email about her family. She says, well, we were packing to go on vacation last night. Here's what I learned. And we were doing the dishes yesterday. We were out in the garden. I would not do that. Now, I have to say, when I try, I'm an educator like you. And I don't know if you've had this. Occasionally, I get away with being personal, but usually it backfires. Because one time I used a story about taking the number 57 bus. And I live in a big city. We all take buses. We take, a streetcar. We don't drive. And so all these people wrote in and said, why did you take a bus? Don't you have enough money for a car? I mean, it's yeah, and people do not get it, or they'll say, "Well, why don't you have a house and not an apartment?" What they don't know is that an apartment in Philadelphia. I mean, don't even you don't even want to think. You could buy a 3-bedroom house in New Jersey for what you pay for an apartment in Philly. I mean, people don't have that concept, but. So you have to be careful. But I've learned my clients do not want to know about me. They don't want to know about my problems. They don't want to know if I'm sick. But a role model, yes, a role model will tell you everything about themselves.
Yeah. So I get a sense it really relates to your personality type in many ways.
Yes, but you can
And
choose. Yeah, you could choose to mark it differently from your personality. But
yeah, but in some ways it's not a choice because our personality, it's not that it doesn't morph or change over the years,
yeah.
but I do sometimes tell stories, but I find it really difficult to tell my own story
hmm
in a way that really works.
hmm
So I've struggled with that. So
So
that's an interesting insight. So I should say, okay, good. I didn't have to do that. I didn't do that
right,
too
you don't
much.
need it. You don't need it. But
Yeah.
it is true they are like people because when you are a solopreneur, and this framework is for solopreneurs, you are the brand. You are marketing yourself. You are the person.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't hire the Robert Middleton company. I would hire the person, Robert Middleton. And that's different again from Coca-Cola, which of course is a service or a big service company where you just hire a company. I would hire the person. And that's another reason you have to be different. But no,
Yeah.
forget, don't try to tell your story. You don't need to.
Yeah. So, well, I think a lot of people, they're looking for, well, how do I market myself?
Yeah.
And they see someone that's really good at telling their story, and they say,
Yeah.
well, I should do that, but they
Yep.
don't reflect on,
Yep.
is that right for me, my personality
Yep.
type? When I meet with people, do I tell stories or whatever? So, the thing about it, so it seems to me a large percentage of self-employed people that are consultants, coaches, and trainers are really educators. I mean,
Mm.
probably a larger percentage, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, but it's important to know that even though you are an educator, you are marketing as an educator. But
Yeah.
for example, Cindy Bidar, who I admire, I interviewed her on my podcast, and she educates. She has at least 100 courses, but she markets herself as a role model. When she markets, she has all kind. We all know when she moved from Michigan to Arizona, we followed her along in the truck. I would never do that. I just said, "Oh, by the way, I'm in Philadelphia now. I used to be in Seattle," and that's all. I don't
Yeah.
even. When I moved between apartments, I didn't tell anybody. When my cat died, I didn't tell anybody. But a role model will tell you those things, even though she's educating. She still markets herself as a role model.
Interesting. I think of the newsletters that I like. I have a number of clients that have
Mm.
put me on their list and I get their
hmm
newsletters. One is about mentoring,
hmm
and it's the one this week, so well written. It's every
Oh,
week it comes, every single Thursday,
oh,
and it talks about she has mentoring software. She works with hospitals in mentoring.
mm.
She's an advocate for mentoring. So she really educates people about mentoring, but it's not about her personal story and how she was mentored
Yeah,
and all of that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
She pulls from things she's read, from the news, from everywhere you can
yep,
imagine, and it's always interesting.
yeah,
And I'm always
yeah,
impressed.
yeah.
Another one is a client in England who, another of my favorite newsletters. He shows people how to increase their value in the eyes of the client.
Oh,
So it's about how do you do proposals? How do you state your price? How do you make sure you don't charge too little? And there's a lot of dimensions to that.
yeah,
And he's always telling stories.
yeah,
So
yeah.
he's being an educator.
But
And
I bet I'm sorry. I bet he's telling stories about his clients and not about him.
yes.
Yeah. So he could be an educator, or he could be and I'd have to
Yeah.
know more about him. But
But I
yeah,
suppose there's always exceptions. I mean, I definitely told stories about things I did.
yeah,
Um, but somehow, in many ways, it's more persuasive when you're talking about what someone else did.
yes,
Not look at me, look how wonderful I am. You can
yeah,
be like me. I could never really
yeah,
totally own that.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I always got so excited when a client got a great result, and I'd write down the result, or I'd get a story,
Yeah.
and I'd talk about that. Here's someone that was struggling like you, and here's the problem they had like you. And anyway, that kind of thing works really well.
Yeah, and I think you could, first of all, you can have a lapse. I mean, for instance, I occasionally try to bring in a personal story. Mine usually backfire. I usually don't do well with personal stories. But I think a lot of times there are people who really market themselves as people, and they do very well. I mean, they talk about themselves more than they talk about their clients, and they do really, really well. And one thing that I take away from this is when you are a small business, and I tell my clients, do not try to be like your mentor unless your mentor is the same archetype, because a lot of celebrities are mentors, and a lot of people will come in and try to be like the celebrity. They'll tell outrageous stories. They'll say, oh, I had this big trip to the Riviera last month, and it doesn't work for them because they're not celebrities. They're in a different phase
They're
of their
not
business.
someone you can get excited about because
Right.
they don't have that image and that
Yeah.
pizzazz and the associations,
Yeah.
and they know George Clooney. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so do you notice these days that so many celebrities have podcasts?
Yeah. Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and they wouldn't have attention for their podcast unless they were a celebrity.
Yeah.
And I
That's
don't know
right.
who, I can't remember. I don't listen to any of those.
Yeah.
That's just not my particular thing.
Yeah.
But they're smart. Often they're actors, so they're well articulated.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is
Yeah.
good for them, but not for somebody like me.
No, I mean, if you tried to be
Yeah.
a celebrity, you probably would flop. I mean, you'd probably get all kinds of hate mail from your clients.
Well, this is interesting. And I've been doing this podcast for since January. I've done
Yeah.
about 60 interviews, and in a way, I'm trying to find a new brand. And in some ways,
Yeah.
the brand is about you, the person I'm interviewing. What do you know? What are your tips, your ideas, your strategies, your approach to doing whatever it is? And it's always interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so that's important. But now I'm trying to find. This is really useful for me, Cathy, because I'm kind of struggling with my brand for the newsletter that I do usually once a week. And it's like, I do various things, and I've let myself be okay with that because I don't have to make income anymore. So it's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
But to find a brand that people would pass on to people, or that it would connect to ordinary visionaries, is interesting.
Well, I think you already have your brand. I think you are continuing your existing brand in a new form.
Yeah.
You're just a new. I think you've always been an educator ever since I can remember, and
Yeah.
this is a new form of being an educator, because you're not there saying, "Well, my wife and I don't know if you're married, or my cat and I, or I went here." You are telling us we don't care. I mean, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but we really don't
No.
care. We don't care where you went on vacation.
Well, that's good, because I don't care about that stuff either very much.
No. But if you're following a celebrity, they always tell you. And the role models sometimes tell you. But the difference is the role models tell you stories about themselves that you can put yourself into. You could say, yeah, she moved from here to here. Yeah, that's what moving is like. But the celebrity would say, well, I hired a whole company. I just went off to Vegas while they packed me up and moved me. And that would be different. Yeah. And people like that. There are people who love reading about celebrities. Well, People Magazine has a following. And there are people in the online world who like hearing about celebrities that they won't be like. But I think we come to you because we want information. We want to know, how do we do things? How do we get things done?
Right. So that makes a lot of sense. So, when you have a system, I love systems. I'm a nut
Yeah.
about systems.
Yeah, I do too.
I can divide things into different categories and
Yeah.
split those into categories and combine them. It's fun. So tell me what number 2 is again.
Number 2 is the Innovator.
Innovator.
Yeah, I don't have these in any order, but usually I say first we have the role model, and then we have the Innovator, and then we have third is the Educator. And those are the 3 most common in coaches and small businesses.
The Innovator is interesting because, I always told my audience that I only came up with one really original idea, and that was borrowed from somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, you can have an original idea, but market it as an educator. The Innovator has a very clear message. I came up with this system or program or with software or 5-step system to solve your problem. And I am the only one who can deliver it. Now, the problem the Innovator has, and each of these archetypes has a problem, a challenge, but the Innovator has a special problem because it's usually new to the world, and we don't believe that he or she can deliver on what he or she promises. We do believe the promises of, say, the role model. They say, I'm just like you. The Innovator, people don't care. They just want to know, can I trust this innovation? Well, it's like, whoever invented the first microwave or the first toaster oven, we didn't believe it. We had to wait and hear about it. So the Innovator tells stories about people who use their system. So Christina Hills, who is an Innovator, has all her stories about people who made beautiful websites using her system and how they formerly spent $5,000 on a webmaster. And now with her system, they can spend just nothing and just do it themselves. And that's her story. And it's very effective. That's what she sells. And you never hear. Occasionally, when she started, she talked a little about her daughters or she mentions them. But we don't, we do know she mentions occasionally her husband or something like that. But we don't know. We don't know what her, where she goes on vacation. She has had one event for people who knew her that was about more personal. But a true Innovator, we don't care. We just want to, and it has to be a really serious problem because it's new and people resist anything new. And the Innovator is marketing on newness, on saying this is something that you won't get anywhere else. Now, I could market as an Innovator with my system of my branding, my archetypes, but I don't. I market on education, and I'll teach you the archetypes, which is a little bit different, and I have different stories. And I don't. It's not as big a challenge as software.
So, can you think of other people in the Innovator category, whether we know about them or not, that you know of and how they went about communicating about what they did?
Yeah, there's another marketer who markets herself as, if you want to have a full-time income from part-time work. And I consider her an Innovator because that's what she talks about. And she does, you might think at first that she's a role model because she uses herself and her family as examples, but she doesn't really use them as stories about herself to get to know her better. She uses stories about herself to show how she applies her system, and she developed her system by applying it to her own life. She was very busy and she had children, and she wanted to have summers off, and she wanted to have time for her kids, and she wanted to be home and have dinner with them. She wanted to be free to go anywhere and do anything. So I consider that an Innovator. There's so she's another one. There's a psychotherapist who Nicole Lewis Keeber, who has a system where she says, "I'm your business therapist," and she innovates on think of your business as your partner in life. What would it be if it were your life partner? And that's a really innovative way of looking at your business. And so she's
Mm.
close. I would consider her an innovator, and she doesn't tell stories about herself. Well, she does a little to illustrate things, but because she is a psychotherapist and a life coach, so she does a little. But these are people who have new ideas, and they market on those ideas, and you don't usually forget them. Usually, you remember them. And there probably are some. Well, there's another one who had a system of, which was an app for matching people and matching places to hold special events, and that was an innovator. And so there are people out there who are innovators.
Well, often people are looking for a new idea to an old problem.
Yeah.
And so I would say that, I came up with Marketing Ball,
Oh yeah.
which
Yeah.
which is the process of going around the bases. You get attention at first base. At second base, you get a meeting. At third base, you get a commitment to work together. And home, you sign the deal and you
Yeah.
make money. And then you get into the details of that. So that was innovative.
You could
And
be you could be an innovative educator. That's fine.
yeah, that's what I was sort of getting at. But I'm always teaching people and going through it and getting
Yeah.
people to do exercises around it and see where
Yeah.
you are in the process.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, I talked about it in my book, the book that I wrote, and the InfoGuru Marketing Manual, and people just took that up as a big breakthrough. I think my problem is I got tired of it.
Yeah. Yeah. People do
So,
get.
but you think of the game baseball, it's been played for what, over 100 years,
Yeah.
and the rules are still pretty much the same, and you can get deeply into it. So it was probably a mistake of mine not to find a way to go into it more deeply, and creating the baseball academy, and God knows what I could have done with it.
Yeah.
There's only so many things you can do in your life, but most people I found aren't real innovators. They don't
Yep.
have the insight, the intelligence, the willingness to work, to tease it out, to test it. It takes a while to do that, to really
Yeah.
have something that really stands out.
Yeah. Well, if you're marketing yourself as an innovator, usually you already have the innovation. And yeah, you have to see if people are receptive. But like your baseball analogy is more like a metaphor, I think, where you illustrate your concepts and we keep coming to you for knowledge. So you can still have an educational framework and present it, but it's the way you talk about it, the way you present it. I mean, you didn't say, well, I have a system and this is the only way you can get it. And here's how it will solve this and this problem. You presented it as a more general background to marketing. And I think people picked up on that. I think, yeah. And you're right, innovator is not a common category. I do see some people, but most people are going to be educators or role models. But when they're innovators, it's very powerful because they have found a solution to something that people really, really want.
Yeah.
And that's all they market on.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm waxing nostalgic about Marketing Ball and thinking
Oh
about
yeah.
Marketing Ball, and I put a lot of work into that and a lot of thought into that, and taught a
Yeah.
lot of classes on it, and
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun. Anyway, so we have the role model, and the role model is always talking about themselves and what they've done,
Yeah.
and doing a lot
Yeah.
of stories, and that's very personality driven, as you said. It's like, um, I can't really go to that place. That's just not
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't
Everyone
either.
has a touch of everything, of course, but
Yeah.
it's not the
No,
main thing.
I can't. Well, you can tell because one thing a role model has is a life that people want to live, and they have a life that they can make public. Because this one role model has a husband and children, and they live in the country, and they do this, and she's great at it. But I live in a city. Even if I were a role model archetype, I mean, I live in a city. The vast majority of people I have found cannot relate to living in a big city because we have certain constraints, we have a certain lifestyle, and I mean, I have everything delivered. I don't go anywhere, and I don't drive, and I don't do any of that. And that's normal in Philadelphia. I'm a normal person. I have a one-person household. 30% of Philadelphia, one-person household. But you go out to some small town in the Midwest, in Michigan, or I don't know, Arizona or someplace, and they think it's really weird. They don't get it. So part of your being a role model does involve having the kind of life. But I do know one person who makes up a lot of detail. She wanted to be a role model, and a lot of her stories are real, but she has made up a family and she's made up a whole life, and she shares that. And I found out I more or less how she's done it, but I don't know. And it works well for her. She talks about her children, her grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and they don't exist. But she talks about them.
It's fictional.
It's fictional because she's a great role model, but I don't do that. I
Yeah,
need it.
that's kind of odd to make it fictional.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I talk about living in the redwood forest in Santa Cruz, which
Oh,
is
okay.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
which is with a river in my backyard, which I'm looking at right there.
Oh.
So, but that's kind of egotistical in some ways as well. So, in our branding, we got to remember that we're giving a
Hmm.
message so people will go, yes, you can help me. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, whatever it is, right?
Well, I don't think that role models are necessarily egotistical or selfish. They relate very, very well to their clients,
Okay.
and they feel they're. In fact, one role model I know who is moved on to become a celebrity. When she write about herself, someone actually showed up at her doorstep. They thought they were personal friends. And they said, "Can we have lunch?" And she said, "Oh, wait a minute, I've got to watch this." So that is a problem. Our role models are everybody's friend, and they do teach. They're very good at what they do, and they explain things. They get a lot of beginners. They do step by step. They're very, very good at what they do. So I don't think they're necessarily selfish, but I do think there's a lesson that we're not all role models, and some of us really don't should not try to tell stories about ourselves. So if someone says, "How did you get started?" I turn that around and start talking about my clients and who I work with and how I help them. I don't talk about me or anything. And
Yeah.
and some people do, and they do it very, very well. So I think it's important to understand that you can go with yourself and use your personality because people are hiring you, the person. And there are some fields where I know people say, well, I really want to know who they were. Like I was talking about financial planners, and I don't know why my financial planner chose this field. I don't know where he, went to school. I don't know what he did. I don't know. And I don't care. All I care about is how he's managing my money. And so it's really important when you are branding to be aware of what people are going to care about. But I did have a friend who said, no, no, I want to know what their character is like. I want to know I want to know all about them. So some people will, and and I do wonder sometimes if I should be more open and more, be talk about more background. But
Well,
uh,
yeah. Well, these categories, obviously, there's some overlap and seeping
mhm,
from one into the other. When I go
yeah,
to somebody's website, I'm
yeah,
interested in a service, and I hear all about the service and the people they help, and they have nothing about themselves.
yeah,
It's like, how come you don't have anything
mm,
about yourself? I mean, who are you? Uh, it doesn't have to be fancy, but here's your background, and here's
yeah,
where you went to
yeah,
school, and here's what you
yeah,
learned, and here's
yeah,
whatever. So it sounds authentic. Anyway,
yeah.
so tell me again what number 4 is.
Number 4 is the passionate advocate. So we have role model, innovator, educator, passionate advocate, and celebrity. And we don't have to talk much about passionate advocate because it's very unlikely that any of us are in that category unless there's someone listening who is a lawyer. So a DUI lawyer could be a passionate advocate because they will go to great lengths to help their client. And they will do things like take pictures of scenes and go out around. And criminal lawyers, lawyers often are passionate advocates, but lawyers know how to draw the line. I mean, they could say, "Look, I'll go the extra mile for you, but I'm not going to give up my life for you." And that's where a lot of people have problems. I did meet someone in a bank who was a passionate advocate, and she would take calls from her private banking clients at 3 in the morning. And I know, I can't believe, but
3
she
in the
did.
morning?
Yeah, but she did. They didn't happen often, but she was willing to do that. So she was clearly a passionate advocate. And that would be that's their
Yeah.
marketing to their private banking clients. We will do anything for you.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. I've worked with a lot of financial planners.
Yeah.
I can imagine them being in that category because it's, you know, it's getting into the weeds with your finances and
Yeah.
where your money is going and where the investments are and what's the best thing. And you're not just educating and say, okay, now you take it and do it. You're really working in a partnership.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so especially if you're working with wealthier clients,
Yeah.
people might really appreciate that passionate advocate. It's like
Yep.
he knows what's going on, he knows what you've done, he knows what your
Yeah.
goals are,
Yeah, and you can call on
etc.
them. Yeah, you can call them for special requests. Like I have a financial planner, and I called him when I couldn't figure out my refinancing documents. And I said, "This doesn't look right." And he's looked at them, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's what this is." And oh, okay. So he did that. And it was, not part of his job, but he did that. So, oh yeah, there are people. But when you say yeah, there's an overlap. Yeah, there is somewhat of an overlap, but you primarily market in one uh, category. When people try to straddle, it doesn't usually work. As with anything in marketing, you have one focus. So, like I said, I do occasionally tell a personal story, but it's very very rare. And people get upset. In fact, one of the advantages of having the categories and the framework is that it keeps you consistent. And consistency, I know Cindy Bedar talks about this a lot, showing up at the same time, same place. I think role models are very good at that. They show up all the time, and they're very good. And you're always there. And you give people what they expect. They expect to see a certain type of content from you when you're a role model or when you're an innovator. And they don't. They get nervous when you give them something else.
In the category of role models, I went to a lot of internet marketing seminars 20 years ago, a number of them, and some of those people really fit that thing.
Yeah.
But they in the same sense, some people that really reach the heights have the three of these. They're a role model, they're an innovator, and an educator. They're kind of doing all of those things really well.
The ones you see leading seminars in person are celebrities. They've been there. They usually start as role models, and they tell you anecdotes about their special lives. They use language. I mean, they dress in odd clothes, depending on who they are. They tell stories. There's one celebrity, I won't name her. She tells stories that are not true. I know they're not true, but we want to hear them. Well, because she
You want to
tells
hear them anyway.
yeah, well, she tells a story about how she went to this place and she maxed out her credit cards to get money to go do this. She maxed at the beginning of her career, and then she maxed out her credit cards to do that. Well, you can't keep maxing out your credit cards. Someone's going to take them away. I mean, you cannot do that. And I also, another celebrity I know, she kept talking about how she was broke 3 years ago. She was never broke. I remember following her 3 years ago, and at the time she had a product and she sold it, and she was telling me how she was making lots of money selling this product. She was not broke, but but they tell stories. It's like when you read People magazine, you kind of have a feeling that you're not getting the whole story, and it doesn't bother you. I mean, People magazine sells very well, and when you hear about all these famous people doing odd things, and you're not getting, like Willie Nelson. Everyone says Willie Nelson smokes pot. Willie Nelson is a runner. He's a fitness fanatic. People don't know that. I heard about one
Really?
interview. Yeah, he runs and he watches his diet and he's very careful. But that's not glamorous. And he occasionally will talk about it, but not much. So you're not getting the whole story when you're reading about the celebrities. But with the people who lead conferences are almost always celebrities. They're good at what they do and they do teach, but you cannot do what they do. You can't imitate them. And they say more than, yeah, if you apply my knowledge. Well, sometimes you cannot apply their knowledge because it doesn't work for you. And sometimes they aren't even innovating. They don't, they're just, yeah.
No, I'd like to emphasize that I'm an average person of average intelligence, but a
Yeah.
certain amount of drive. And if I can attract clients, you probably can too. And let me show you the systems, the ideas, the approaches, break it down, make it common sense.
Yeah.
So I felt always comfortable in the educator role,
Mm-hmm.
and never quite in the guru role. I call my
Yeah.
book Info Guru. So Robert's the
Yeah.
info guru of marketing. I never felt totally comfortable about that, but it's interesting. So people that are educators, they do newsletters, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, anybody can do a newsletter. Passionate advocates rarely have a newsletter because if you need a DUI lawyer, a criminal lawyer, you're not going to get a newsletter from a criminal lawyer unless, you're a criminal. I mean, I can't imagine, why would you read a letter
Right.
from when you wouldn't? So
Yeah.
someone who's a passionate advocate, and another one, they're usually people who are, you seek them out, like wedding planners can be passionate advocates. They can say, well, the flowers are wilted, I'll drive 3 hours to get you new ones. But you don't get a newsletter from a wedding planner while you're still single. I mean, you'd have no
No.
reason to. So they don't usually have a mailing list, and they at all. They just kind of, now the innovators, are, once you use their innovation, they have to keep giving you new stuff. But
Yeah. What also role models,
yeah,
innovators and educators would have newsletters. You want to have good website copy,
yeah,
a simple, clear website saying what you do, how you do, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And speaking. So I did a fair amount of speaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's how I built my business to begin with. I went out and spoke for free everywhere in San Francisco and the Bay Area. And then that got names from my newsletter list. And then that's how it grew. I collected everybody's card.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many people's name I typed into my database to send stuff out to people. So there's things that all businesses need to do, but they just do it differently.
Exactly. Your newsletter, an educator newsletter, doesn't look like a role model newsletter. But I will say that
Right.
passionate advocates do not go out. Well, they do go out and speak because they want to get their name out there, but they don't have newsletters. And some of them have pretty awful websites because you don't hire a criminal lawyer because of his website. When you go by reputation, you don't even, usually you get referred to some of these passionate advocates. You don't even, so they're a little different. And the celebrities can be, well, they're just there. I mean, everybody knows who they are.
Well, the celebrities do videos, they do podcasts,
Yep.
They do a lot of social media.
Yeah.
I gave up on social media years ago. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
I just couldn't compute for me for what I was doing. I'm not saying it doesn't work for people that are educators, but for me, just being visible was not appealing to me. Just here I am. Here's an idea. I don't know. Didn't work.
Well, it works for some. It works for some people. You're right, and not other. I don't know what the formula is, but I think the key is the content of what. Like if you were a role model who used social media, you would have different content than an educator who uses social media. So like I do use social media and I have referrals to my podcast. I refer people to a blog post. It doesn't do much, but it gets my name out there. And I have had a few subscribers from it. But no, you're absolutely right. The way it's the content, the stories you tell that differentiates you from the competition. And if you are, any of these categories, you do need a really good website. Well, there are people who live without a website, but not many. And you need a good website, you need a good newsletter, you need good stories, but the content is going to be different.
You know, I don't know how this fits in, but it just popped into my mind. I notice that so many businesses have no keep in touch mechanism whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like even stores. We have a little downtown in Boulder Creek, like the littlest downtown.
Yeah.
That's 2 blocks long.
Oh.
I walk my dogs along that street every day, and but none of those stores have a mailing list or an update you on new products we have. Nobody has anything, and they have terrible walk by traffic, so it's not a very good retail area. So this thing of staying in touch with people, and as an educator, well, you've always got something to teach people. Here's something I learned, here's something I saw, here's something I tried, here's what a client did.
Yeah.
Same with Innovators, I suppose. Same with role models.
It's interesting. The Innovators use their newsletter. They don't usually send newsletters every day. They usually just send the newsletter when they have a program in process, when they have some reason for you to buy. They don't send newsletters on a regular basis just to get to know you. And they rely a lot on affiliates to promote them, and they have programs a certain number of times a year, and that's what they do. They don't usually have daily newsletters, like here's a cute little story, because what would the call to action be? It's a lot of times it's not come and have an appointment. A lot of times it's come wait for a class to start or wait for this module. So they don't usually have daily hey, good to know you. The role models are the ones who tell stories about themselves, and yesterday I went for a walk, spring is here, all that kind of thing, and they can tell those stories.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for clarifying these different categories. That's really useful. This is something I wish I'd known 20 years ago.
Oh.
Or how about 40 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I'm working on a book about it. It should be out sometime, hopefully before the end of the year. Your mess is not your message, because so many people are told, look at your mess, and that's your message, and it's not your message. You don't want to tell people about the problems you had. You want to tell them about solutions. And and I go through these categories in more detail.
Great. So if you were going to sum up something for our listeners who have stayed this long, a really interesting conversation for me, obviously.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts or insights into this whole thing of the different categories of branding?
Yeah, I would say if you are a small service-based business, usually one person, maybe you have a team that you hire, you cannot market like the big companies. You have to have a different style. And I call it marketing when the brand is you. You are the brand, your personality, your person you are. And there are different degrees of ways that you can get that across. But when you pick up a specific style of marketing, it emphasizes your personality, and it brings a consistency that's really, really important. So picking your archetype, well, most people don't pick their archetype. They usually have one already. And a lot of times when I look at successful businesses, I can identify their archetype, even though they have no idea, but they're very consistent. The way they sign their emails, the way they write messages, the way they tell stories, very consistent. So don't try to be like the big guys. Don't try to be like your mentor. Your mentor may be someone different archetype from you. Be yourself when you market.
Cathy, thank you so much for taking the time to enlighten us about this really important topic. It was really fun. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it too.